So we're starting off to where we left off yesterday. We're looking at page 40 of unit number 3. We're at the end of lesson number 8. So we looked at the structure of a business letter. We looked at that at the end of class on Thursday. There's an example on page 41, as well as an explanation of what all of those different numbers mean as well. And you can see exactly what everyone is. So looking at the letter we have, it's on page 41. You can see number 1 starts with an address, and this is the address of the person who is writing the letter. Number 2 is the address, it's the date the letter is being written. Number 3 is the address that it is being sent to. So where is it going? So for example, our first one is 123 Fake Street is the address the person lives at who's writing this letter. The date's April 1st, 2004. And it's going to Pete's Insurance Company at 1511 Morris Avenue. And that's in Oshawa. And then there's a postal code there. And our number 4 is our salutation or our greeting. So it's dear Mr. Jones. Then the first paragraph gets right to the point. What is the issue? What's the reason why you are writing this letter? What's going on? Why are you even bothering to send this out? And then after number 6 there is the remaining paragraph. So it's going to explain your issue. Paragraph 5, you talk about exactly why you're writing this. Paragraph 6 looks at just the extra details. So what's the extra details that go along with that? So this is looking at how the problem insurance is car insurance, and said they didn't pay, and he did. And then our number 7 is our last paragraph. That looks at how do you want this to end? What action do you want the person who receives this letter to take? What action do you want to happen? So, and then you have your sincerity, your closing, and then your name both typed out and with a signature as well. You want to have both of those included with this. And then it'll lead us into key question number 9. This is where we didn't get to this on Thursday, so we're starting with our new stuff today. So this says, complete the following key question for submission for marking. So imagine that you are the thief who's been falsely accused. Even though you actually stole it, you were still accused of stealing it. Pretending you are the thief in the green raincoat, write a business letter to that department store. Expressing your disappointment in how they treated you. Address your letter to the general manager of the store. Your letter should be about 1 page in length and be neatly typed or written. So there is some information that you can pull out from this short story. There's other information over that you're going to have to make up to go along with this. So, for example, you know he's shopping at Gwen's department store, and you know roughly where it is. It's at the corner of 37th Street. I'm trying to get the page I had there. And Main Street, corner 37th and Main. So you know that you can choose an address or something there. But you don't know who the general manager is. All the people mentioned in the story are just managers or employees. You have to make up who is the general manager. And then you have to do some creative writing with what happened. Explain it from that accused's point of view. And explain what happened. So that is key question number 9. It's worth 20 marks. You see there's a rubric there that it goes over exactly how you're being marked as, what I'm looking for, and how you can ensure you get a high mark. With this rubric, level 1 is the lowest you can go. Level 4 is the highest. And that is the rest of lesson number 8. So before we start with lesson 9, we're going to read chapter 9 in To Kill a Mockingbird. So you can find that on page 99 of your course novel. And as always, I will have it up on the screen here as well. So you can follow along in your course novel, or you can just follow along on the screen. So we're starting off page 99. Now, I just need to let you know, this is the whole story from here on is starting to change. So what happens here at the beginning of chapter 9 may not make a whole lot of sense right away, but by the time we get to the end of the story, it should all tie in. So it starts off. You can take that back, boy. This order, given to me by Cecil Jacobs, was the beginning of a rather thin time for Jim and me. My fists were clenched and ready to fly. Atticus had promised me he would wear me out if he ever heard me fighting anymore. I was far too old and too big for such childish things. And the sooner I learned to hold in, the better off everybody would be. However, I soon forgot. Cecil Jacobs made me forget. He announced in the schoolyard the day before that Scout Finch's daddy defended N-words. I denied it, but told Jem. What do you mean by saying that? I asked. Nothing, said Jem. Ask Atticus, he'll tell you. Do you defend M-words, Atticus? I asked him that evening. Of course I do, Scout. Don't say N-word. That's common. So everyone at school says, for now on, everybody less one. Well, if you don't want me grow up talking that way, how about you send me to school? Then why you send me to school? My father looked at me mildly. There's amusement in his eyes. Despite our compromise, my campaign to avoid school had continued in one form or another since my first day's dose of it. The beginning of last September had brought on sinking spells, dizziness, and mild gastric complaints. I went so far as to pay a nickel for the privilege of rubbing my head against the head of Miss Rachel's cook's son, who's afflicted with a tremendous ringworm. It didn't take. I was worried about another bone. Do you all lawyers defend Negroes, Atticus? Of course they do, Scout. So why did Cecil Jake say defending M-words? To me, it sounded like you were running a sill. Atticus sighed. I'm saying defending a Negro. His name's Tom Robinson. He lives in that little settlement beyond the town dump. He's a member of Calpurnia's church. And Cal knows his family really well. She says they're clean living folks. Scout, you aren't old enough to understand some things yet. But there's some high talk around town to the effect that I shouldn't do much about defending this man. It's a particular case, and won't come to trial until summer session. John Taylor was kind enough to give us a postponement. If you shouldn't be defending him, then why are you doing it? For a number of reasons, Scout, said Atticus. The main one is, if I didn't, I couldn't hold my head up in town. I couldn't represent this county in the legislature. I couldn't tell you or Jem what not to do something again. You mean if you didn't offend that man, Jem and I wouldn't have to mind you anymore? Well, that's about right. Why? Because I could never ask you to mind me again, Scout. Scout, simply by the fact that the nature of the work, every lawyer gets at least one case in his lifetime that affects him personally. This one's mine, I guess. You might hear some ugly talk about it at school. But do one thing for me, if you will. You just hold your head high and keep those fists down. No matter what anybody says to you, don't you let them get your goat. Try fighting with your head for a change. It's a good one, even if it does resist learning. Atticus, are we going to win it? No, honey. Then why? Simply because we were licked 100 years before we started. There's no reason for us not to try to win. You sound like Cousin Ike Finch. Ike Finch was Macon County's sole surviving Confederate veteran. He wore a General Hood-type beard, which was inordinately vain. At least once a year, Atticus, Jem, and I called on him. And I would have to kiss him. It was horrible. Jem would listen respectfully to Atticus, and Cousin Ike rehashed the war. Tell you, Atticus, Cousin Ike would say, Missouri Compromise is what licked us. If I had to go through it again, I'd walk every step of the way there and back again. Just like I did before, and someone would whip him this time. Now, in 1864, when Stonewall Jackson came by, beg your pardon, young folks, old Blue Light was in heaven then. God rest his saintly brow. Come here, Scout, said Atticus. I crawled into his lap, tucked my head under his chin. He put his head around me and rocked me gently. It's different this time, he said. This time we ain't fighting the Yankees. We're fighting our friends. But remember this. No matter how bitter things get, they're still our friends. And this is still our home. With this in mind, I faced Cecil Jacob in the schoolyard the next day. You gonna take that back, boy? You gotta make me first, he yelled. My folks say your daddy was a disgrace, and the N-word ought to hang from the water tank. I drew a bead on him. Remember what Atticus said and dropped my fist and walked away. Scout's a coward was ringing in my ears. It was the first time I ever walked away from a fight. Somehow, if I fought Cecil, I would let Atticus down. Atticus so rarely asked Jeremy to do something for him. I could take being called a coward for him. I felt extremely noble for having remembered and remained noble for 3 weeks. Then Christmas came and disaster struck. Gemini viewed Christmas with mixed feelings. The good side was the tree and Uncle Jack Finch. Every Christmas Eve day, we met Uncle Jack at Macomb Junction, and he would spend a week with us. The flip of the coin revealed the uncompromising lineaments of Aunt Alexandria and Francis. I suppose I should include Uncle Jimmy, Aunt Alexandria's husband, but he never spoke a word to me in our life except to say, "Get off the fence," once. I never saw any reason to take notice of him. Neither did Aunt Alexandria. Long ago, in the verse of friendliness, Auntie and Uncle Jimmy produced a son named Henry, who left home as soon as he was humanly possible, married, and produced Francis. Him and his wife deposited Francis as grandparents every Christmas, then pursued their own pleasures. No amount of sighing could get or reduce Atticus to let us spend Christmas Day at home. We went to Finch's Landing every Christmas in my memory. The fact that Auntie was a good cook was some compensation for being forced to spend a religious holiday with Francis Hancock. He was a year older than I, and I avoided him on principle. He enjoyed everything I disapproved of and disliked my ingenious diversions. Aunt Alexandria was Atticus' sister, but when Jim told me about changelings and siblings, I decided that she had been swapped at birth, and that my grandparents had perhaps received a Crawford instead of a Finch. Had I ever harbored the mystical notion of mountains that seemed to obsess lords and judges, Aunt Alexandria would have been Annalise to Mount Everest. Throughout my early life, she was cold and there. When Uncle Jack jumped down from the train Christmas Eve day, we had to wait for the porter to hand him 2 long packages. Jim and I always thought funny that Uncle Jack pecked Agus in the cheek. They were the only 2 men we ever saw kiss each other. Uncle Jack shook hands with Jim and swung me high, but not high enough. Uncle Jack was a head shorter than Atticus, the baby of the family. He was younger than Aunt Alexandria. He and Auntie looked alike. But Uncle Jack made bare use of his face. We were never wary of his sharp nose and chin. He was one of the few men of science who never terrified me, probably because he never behaved like a doctor. Whenever he performed a minor service for Jeremy, such as moving a splinter from our foot, he told us exactly what he was going to do, gave us an estimation of much it would hurt, and explained the use of any tongs he employed. One Christmas, I lurked in the corners nursing a twisted splinter in my foot, praying no one to come near me. When Uncle Jack caught me, he kept me laughing about a preacher who hated going to church so much that every day he stood at the gate in his dressing gown, smoking a hookah, and delivering 5-minute sermons to anyone who passed by who desired spiritual comfort. I tried to make Uncle Jack let me know when he would be pulled out. He held a bloody splinter with a pair of tweezers, so he yanked it while I was laughing, and that was what was known as relativity. "What's in those packages?" I asked him, pointing to the long, thin parcels the porter had given him. "None of your business," he said. Jem said, "How's Rose Elmer?" Rose Elmer was Uncle Jack's cat. She had a beautiful yellow female. Uncle Jack said was one of the few women he could stand permanently. He reached into his coat pocket and brought out some snapshots. He admired them. "She's getting fat," I said. "I should think so. She eats all leftover fingers and ears from the hospital." "Aw, that's a darn fine story," I said. "I beg your pardon?" I said, "Don't pay attention to her, Jack. She's trying it out. Cal says she's been cussing fluently for a week now. Uncle Jack raised his eyebrows and said nothing. As for seeing on the dim theory aside from the innate attractiveness of such words, that if Atticus discovered I'd picked them up at school, he wouldn't make me go. But at supper that evening, asking to pass the darn ham, please, Uncle Jack pointed me and said, "See me afterwards, young lady." When supper was over, Uncle Jack went to the living room and sat down. He stopped aside to me, Quincy in his lap. I liked to smell him. He was like a bottle of alcohol and something pleasantly sweet. Pushed back my bangs and looked at me. "You have more like Agnes than your mother," he said. "You're also growing out of your pants a little. Reckon they fit all right. You like words like damn and hell, don't you now?" I said, I reckon so. "Well, I don't," said Uncle Jack. "Not unless there's an extreme provocation connected with them. I'll be here a week. I don't want to hear any words like that while I'm here. Scout, you'll get in trouble if you go on saying things like that. You're gonna grow up being a lady, don't you?" I said, "Not particularly." "Of course you do. Now let's get to the tree." We decorated the tree until bedtime, and that night I dreamed of two long packages for Jim and me. Next morning, Jim and I dived for them. They were from Atticus, who had written Uncle Jack to get them for us, and they were what we'd asked for. "Don't point them in the house," said Atticus, when Jim aimed at a picture on the wall. "You'll have to teach them to shoot," said Uncle Jack. "That's your job," said Atticus. I merely bowed to the inevitable. It took Atticus's courtroom voice to drag us away from the tree. He declined to let us take our air rifles out to the landing. I had already begun to think of shooting Francis. So if we made one false move, he'd take them away from us for good. Finch's Landing consisted of 366 steps down a high bluff and ended in a jetty. Farther down the stream, beyond the bluff, were traces of an old cotton landing, where Finch Negroes had loaded bales and produce, unloaded blocks of ice, flour, and sugar, farm equipment, and feminine apparel. A two-rut road ran from the riverside and vanished among the dark trees. At the end of the road was a two-storied white house with porches circulating upstairs and downstairs. In his old age, our ancestor Simon Finch had built it to please his nagging wife. All the porches all resembled the ordinary houses of its era ended. The internal arrangements of the Finch house were indicative of Simon's guilelessness and absolute trust with which he guarded his offspring. There were 6 bedrooms upstairs, 4 for the 8 female children, 1 for Welcome Finch, the sole son, and 1 for visiting relatives. Simple enough. But the daughters' rooms could be reached only by one staircase. Welcome's room and the guest room by another. The daughters' staircase in the ground floor bedroom of their parents. So Simon always knew the hours of his daughter's nocturnal comings and goings. There was a kitchen separate from the rest of the house, tacked onto it by a wooden catwalk. In the backyard was a rusty bell with a pole, used to summon field hands or as a distress signal. A widow's walk was on the roof, but no widows walked there. From it, Simon oversaw his overseer, watched the riverboats, and gazed into the lives of surrounding landholders. There went with the house the usual legend about the Yankees. One Finch female recently engaged donned her complete trousseau to save it from raiders in the neighborhood. She became stuck in the door of Dara's staircase, but was doused with water and finally pushed through. When we arrived at the landing, Aunt Alexandria kissed Uncle Jack. Francis kissed Uncle Jack. Uncle Jimmy shook hands with Uncle Jack. Jim and I gave a present to Francis, who gave us a present. Jim felt his age and gravitated towards the adults, leaving me to entertain our cousin. Francis was 8 and slicked back his hair. "What did you give for Christmas?" I asked politely. "Just what I asked for," he said. Francis had requested a pair of knee pants, a red leather boot sack, 5 shirts, and an untied bow tie. Jim got me some air rifles, and Jim got a chemistry set, a toy one, I reckon. No, real one. He says he's going to make some invisible ink, and I'm going to write Dill in it. Finch asked what was used to that. We can't see his face when he gets letter from me with nothing in it. It'll drive him nuts. Talking to Francis gave me a sensation of sailing slowly at the bottom of the ocean. He was the most boring child I'd ever met. As he lived in Mobile, he could not inform me of our school authorities, but managed to tell everything he knew to Aunt Alexandria, who in turn unburdened herself to Atticus, who either forgot it or giving me hell, whatever struck his fancy. The only time I ever heard him speak sharply to anyone was I heard him say, "Sister, I do the best I can with them." It started with me going around in overalls. Aunt Alexandra was fanatical on the subject of my attire. I could not possibly hope to be late if I wore breeches. When I said I could do nothing in a dress, she said I wasn't supposed to do things that required pants. Aunt Alexandra's vision of my deportment involved me playing with small stoves, tea sets, and wearing a pearl necklace she gave me when I was born. Furthermore, I should be a ray of sunshine in my father's lonely life. I suggest that one could be a ray of sunshine in his pants just as well, but Auntie said that's one thing to behave like a sunbeam, that I was born good but had grown progressively worse every year. She hurt my feelings and set my teeth permanently on edge. But when I asked Atticus about it, he said there's always enough sunbeams in the family to go on about my business. He didn't mind me in the much way I was. At Christmas dinner, I sat at the little table in the dining room. Jim and Francis sat with the adults at the dining table. Auntie continued to isolate me long after Jim and Francis graduated to the big table. I often wondered what she thought I'd do, get up and throw something? I sometimes thought about asking her if she would let me sit at the big table with all the rest of them just once. I would prove to her how civilized I could be. After all, I ate at home every day with no major mishaps. When I begged Atticus to lose influence, he said he had none. We were guests, and we sat where she told us to sit. He also said Aunt Alexandria didn't understand girls much. She never had one. But her cooking made up for everything. 3 kinds of meat, summer vegetables from her pantry, peach pickles, 2 kinds of cake, and ambrosia consisted of a modest Christmas dinner. Afterwards, the adults made for the living room and sat in a dazed condition. Jim lay on the floor, and I went to the backyard. "Put on your coat," said Agus dreamily, so I didn't hear him. Francis sat beside me on the back steps. "And that was the best yet," I said. "Grandma's a wonderful cook," said Francis. "She's going to teach me how." "Boys don't cook." I giggled and thought of Jim in an apron. "Grandma says all men should learn to cook, and that men ought to be careful with their wives and wait on them when they don't feel good," said my cousin. "I don't want Dill waiting on me. I'd rather wait on him." "Dill? Yeah, don't say anything, but we're going to get married as soon as we're big enough. He asked me last summer." "Francis, what's the matter with him?" I asked. "You can get married with him." "You say that little runt Grandma says stays with Rachel every summer?" "That's exactly who I mean." "Know all about him," said Francis. "What about him?" "Grandma says he hasn't got a home. He has too. He lives in Meridian. He just passed from relative to relative, and Miss Rachel keeps him every summer." "Francis, that's not so." Francis grinned at me. "You mighty dumb sometimes, Jean-Louis. Sometimes you don't know any better, though." "What do you mean?" "If Uncle Atticus lets you run around with stray dogs, that's his own business. Like Grandma says, it ain't your fault. I guess it ain't your fault if Uncle Atticus is an M-word lover besides. But I'm here to tell you, sir, he does more for the rest of the family." "Francis, what the heck do you mean?" "Just what I said. Grandma says it's bad enough he lets you run wild, but now he's turned to an M-word lover. We'll never be able to walk the streets and make him again. He's ruining the family, that's what he's doing." Francis rose and sprinted down the catwalk to the old kitchen. "At a safe distance," he called. "He's nothing but an M-word lover." "He's not," I roared. "Don't know what you're talking about. You better cut it out this red-hot minute." I leapt off the steps and ran down the catwalk. It was easy to call her Francis. I said, "Take it back quick." He jerked loose and spread to the old kitchen. "M-word lover," he yelled. "When stalking one's prey, it's best to take one's time. Say nothing, and as sure as eggs, he will come curious and emerge." Francis reappeared at the kitchen door. "You still mad, Jean-Louise?" he asked tentatively. "Nothing to speak of," I said. Francis came out the catwalk. "You're going to take it back, Francis?" It was too quick of the draw. Francis shot back in the kitchen, so I retired to the steps. I could wait patiently. I had sat there for 5 minutes when Uncle Alexander speak. "Where's Francis?" "He's out yonder in the kitchen." He knew he's not supposed to play in there. Francis came to her and yelled, "Grandma, she's got me in there and she won't let me out." "What's it all about, Jean-Louise?" Look at Aunt Alexandra. "Having on there, Auntie. I ain't holding them." "Yes, she is," shut up Francis. "She won't let me out." "You've been fussing." "Jean-Louise got mad at me, Grandma," called Francis. "Francis, come here. Jean-Louise, if you hear another word of you, I'll tell your father." "Did you say a hell while ago?" "Nope. I thought I did. Better not hear it again." Aunt Alexandra was a back porch listener. When she was out of sight, Francis came at him and grinned. "Don't you fool with me," he said. He jumped into the yard and kept his distance, kicking tufts of grass, tearing around occasionally, smiled at me. John appeared on the porch, looked at us, and went away. Francis climbed the mimosa tree, came down, put his hands in his pockets, strode into the yard. Ha! He said. I asked him who he thought he was. Uncle Jack? Francis said he reckoned I got told for me to sit there and leave him alone. I ain't butting you, I said. Francis looked at me carefully, concluded I had been sufficiently subdued, and crooned softly. N-word lover. This time, I slipped my knuckle to the bone on his front teeth. My left impaired, I sailed him with my right, but not for long. Uncle Jack pinned my arms to my side and said, Stand still! Aunt Alexander ministered to Francis, wiping his tears away with her handkerchief, rubbing his hair and patting his cheek. Agus Jim and Uncle Jimmy had come to the back porch, and Francis started yelling. Who started this? Said Uncle Jack. Francis and I pointed at each other. Grandma Bell, she called me a lady and jumped on me. Is that true, Scout? Uncle Jack, I reckon so. When Uncle Jack looked down at me, he featured like Aunt Alexandra's. You know I told you to use words. I told you, didn't I? Yes, but you're not in trouble now. Stay there. I was debating whether to decide to stay in their realm. I was hard indecision a moment too long. I turned to feel Uncle Jack was quicker. He found myself suddenly looking at a tiny ant struggling into the breadcrumb in the grass. I'll never speak to you again as long as I live. I hate you and despise you and hope you die tomorrow. The statement like that seemed to encourage Uncle Jack. For anything, Ren and Alex recovered, but he decided coming, and it's high time we went home. Climbed to the back and seat of the car without saying goodbye to anyone. And I was at home, I ran to my room and slammed the door. Jem tried to say something nice, but I wouldn't let him. When I surveyed the real damage, there was only 7 or 8 red marks, and I was reflecting upon the sense of relativity when someone knocked on the door. I asked who it was. Uncle Jack answered. Go away. Uncle Jack said if I wanted to talk to that, he'd lick me again, so I was quiet. When I entered the room, I retreated to a corner and turned my back to him. Scout, he said, do you still hate me? Go on, please, sir. Why do you think you would hold against me? He said, I'm disappointed in you. You had that coming and you know it. Dan neither. Honey, you can't go calling people. You ain't fair, I said. You ain't fair. Uncle Jack spoke, shut up. Not fair, how not? You're real nice, Uncle Jack, and I reckon I love you even when it's did, but you don't understand children much. Uncle Jack put his hands on his hips and looked at me. Why do you think Mr. and children, Miss Jean Louise? Such conduct was required a little understanding. It was off purpose, disorderly, and abusive. You give me a chance to tell you? I don't mean assassin, just trying to tell you. Uncle Jack sat down on the bed. His eyes came together and peered at me under them. Proceed, he said. I took a deep breath. Well, in the first place, you never stopped to give me a chance to tell my side of it. You just lit right into me. And when Jem and I fussed, Agus doesn't even listen. They were just listening to Jem's side, but here's mine too. In the second place, you told me never to use words except in extreme provocation. And Francis provoked me enough to knock his block off. Uncle Jack scratched his head. What's your side of it, Scout? Francis called Agus something, and I was going to take it off him. Why did he call him an N-word lover? Ain't too sure what it means, but the way Francis said it. Tell you one thing right now, Uncle Jack. I swear before God, if I'll sit there and let someone say something like that about Atticus. He called Atticus that? Yes, sir, he did, and a lot more. He said Atticus would be the rudest in the family and let me and Jemmy run wild. Look at Uncle Jack's face. I thought I was in for it again, and he said, we'll see about this. I knew Francis was in for it tonight. I have a good mind to go out there tonight. Please, sir, just let it go, please. I had no intention of letting it go, he said. Alexander should know about this. The idea of, wait, I'll get your hands to that boy. Uncle Jack, please promise you something, please, sir. Promise you won't tell Alex about this. He's asked one time not to let anything I heard about him make me mad. I'd rather him think we're fighting about something else instead. Please promise. But don't like a French getting away with something like that. He didn't. You reckon you could tie my hand? It's still bleeding some. Of course it will, baby. I know of no hand I would more glad to tie up. Will you come this way? Uncle Jack gallantly bowed me to the bathroom. When he cleaned and managed my knuckles, he entertained me with a tale of a funny nearsighted old gentleman who had a cat named Hodge, who counted all the cracks in the sidewalk when he went to town. There now, he said, you have a very unladylike scar on your wedding ring finger. Thank you, sir. Uncle Jack, ma'am, what's a W lady? Uncle Jack plunged another long tale of an old prime minister who sat in the House of Commons and blew feathers into the air and tried to keep them there when all those men were just losing their heads. I guess he's trying to answer my question, but it never made no sense whatsoever. Later, when I was supposed to be in bed, I went down a hall for a drink of water and heard Atticus and Uncle Jack in the living room. She'll never marry Atticus. Why? I might have children. You have a lot to learn, Jack. You know, your daughter gave me first lessons this afternoon. She said I didn't understand children much and told me why. She's right, Atticus. She told me how I was straight treated her. Oh dear, I'm so sorry I romped on her. Atticus chuckled. She earned it. Dove was too remorseful. I waited on tenterhooks for Uncle Jack to tell my side of the story. But he didn't. He simply murmured, her use of bathroom invective leaves nothing to the imagination. But she doesn't know the meaning of half what she says. She asked what a W lady was. What did you tell her? Tell her about Lord Melbourne. Jack, when a child asks you something, answer for goodness sake. But don't make a production of it. Children are children, and they can spawn an invasion quicker than adults. Evasion simply muddles them. No, my father mused. You had the right to answer this afternoon, but the wrong reasons. The bad language is a stage all children go through, and it dies in the time they learn they're not attracting attention with it. Hot-headedness isn't. Scout's got to learn to keep her head in her learn soon what's in store for her next few months. She's come through it along. She's coming along though. Gem's getting older. She follows this example a good bit now. All she needs is some assistance sometimes. You'd never lay a hand on her. I admit that. So far, I've been able to get by with threats. Jack, she reminds me she well she can. Doesn't come up with to scratch half the time, but she tries. That's not the answer. No, but bothers me, she knows she tries. That's what makes a difference. What bothers me is that she and Jem will have to absorb some ugly things pretty soon. I'm not worried about Jem keeping his head, but Scout soon jump on someone as looking for prize at stake. Waited for Uncle Jack to make it break his promise. He still didn't. Agus, how bad's it going to be? You haven't told me. You haven't had too much chance to discuss it. It couldn't be worse, Jack. The only thing we've got is a black man's word against the Yules. The evidence boils down to you did, I didn't. The jury couldn't possibly be expected to take Tom Robinson's word against the Yules. Are you acquainted with the Yules? Uncle Jack said yes. He remembered them. He described them to Atticus, but Atticus said, you're a generation off. The present ones are the same, though. What are you going to do then? Before I'm through, I intend to jar the jury a bit. I think of a reasonable chance in appeal, though. I really can't tell at this stage. Jack, you know I'd hoped to get through life without making a case of this kind, but John Taylor pointed me at it and said, you're it. Let this cup pass from you, eh? Right, but do you think I could face my children otherwise? You know what's going to happen when I do, and I hope and pray I can get Jem and Scout through it without bitterness. And most of all, without catching Makeham's usual disease. When reasonable people go stark raving mad, anything involving a Negro comes up. It's something that I don't pretend to understand. I just hope that Jem and Scout come to me for their answers instead of listening to the town. No, I hope they trust me enough. Jean Louise. My scalp jumped. I stuck my head around the corner. Sir, go to bed. I scurried to my room and went to bed. Uncle Jack was a prince of a fellow not to let me down. But I never figured out how Atticus knew why I was listening. And why it was not too many years later I realized he wanted me to hear every word that he had said. So I have chapter 10 there. We'll read that tomorrow. We're jumping back into our unit now, looking at lesson 9. This looks at a character analysis. So the story you will read in this lesson is character-driven. That means that the characters are the most important plot elements, not the conflict, it's not the setting, it's the characters themselves. Their motivation, interests, and actions move the plot along. So, looking at the short story, it says, before you begin reading, consider whether you think there is ever a justification for murder. For example, if someone does something so horrible, can their death be justified? When reading, if someone does something so horrible, or something, keep in mind the idea of irony. Dramatic irony occurs when the reader or audience has information that characters within the story do not have. How does irony change the outcome of the story? So, dramatic irony is when we as an audience or readers know about something that the characters in the story do not. And there's a couple examples in this short story we're going to read. And I'll point that out at the end of the story about what the dramatic irony is. So this is short story is Lamb to the Slaughter by Roald Dahl. It's from 1953. So once again, it is an older short story, but still it's still relevant. It still is a really interesting story. So we won't finish this in class today, just because it is 7.5 pages. So we'll get to some of it today and we'll pick it up tomorrow. So the room was warm and clean. The curtains drawn, the 2 table lamps alight, hers and the one beyond beside the empty chair opposite. On the sideboard behind her, 2 tall glasses, soda water, whiskey, fresh ice cubes in a thermos bucket. Mary Maloney was waiting for her husband to come home from work. Now and again she would glance up the clock, but without anxiety, merely to please herself that the thought that each minute gone by made it nearer the time when he would be home. There was a slow smiling about her, and about everything she did. The drop of a head as she bent over the sewing was curiously tranquil. Her skin, this was her 6th month with child, had acquired a wonderful translucent quality. The mouth was soft, and the eyes, with their new placid look, seemed larger than before. When the clock said 10 minutes to 5, she began to listen. A few moments later, punctually as always, she heard the tires on the gravel outside and the car door slamming, the footsteps passing the window, the key turning in the lock. She laid aside her sewing, stood up, and went forward to kiss him when he came in. "Hello, darling," she said. "Hello, darling," he answered. She took his coat and hung it from the closet. She then walked over and made the drinks, a strongest one for him and a weak one for herself. As soon as she was back in her chair with the sewing, he in the other, opposite, holding the tall glass with both hands, rocking it from side to side, so the ice cubes tinkled against it. For her, this is always a blissful time of the day. She knew he didn't want to speak much till the first drink was finished, and she on her side was content to sit quietly, enjoying his company after the long hours alone in the house. She loved to luxuriate in the presence of this man, and to feel almost as a sunbather feels the sun, that warm male glow that comes out of him to her when they are alone together. She loved him for the way he sat loosely in the chair, for the way he came in the door, or moved slowly across the room with the long strides. She loved the intent, far look in his eyes when he rested on her, and the fine shape of the mouth, especially the way he remained silent about his tiredness, sitting still with himself till the whiskey had taken some of it away. "Tired, darling?" "Yes," he said, "I'm tired." As he spoke, he did an unusual thing. He lifted the glass and drained it in one swallow, though there was still half of it, at least half it left. She wasn't really watching him because she knew what he had done, because she heard the ice cubes falling back against the bottom of the empty glass. When he lowered his arm, he paused a moment, leaned forward in the chair, then got up and went to sort of fetch another one himself. "I'll get it," she cried, jumping up. "Sit down," he said. When he came back, she noticed that the new drink was dark amber with a quantity of whiskey in it. "Darling, shall I get your slippers?" "No." She watched him. He began to sip the dark yellow drink and could see the little oily swirls in the liquid because it was so strong. "I think it's a shame," she said, "that when a policeman gets to be as senior as you, they keep him walking about on his feet all day long." He didn't answer, so she bent her head again, went on with her sewing. Yet each time she lifted the drink to his lips, she heard the ice cubes clinking against the side of the glass. "John," she said, "would you like me to get you some cheese? I haven't made any supper because it's Thursday." "No," he said. If you're too tired to eat out," she went on, "it's not too late. There's plenty of meat and stuff in the freezer. You can have it right here and not even move out of the chair." Her eyes waited him for an answer, a smile, a nod, or any such sign. Anyway, she went on, I'll get you some cheese and crackers first. I don't want it, he said. She moved uneasily in the chair, the large eyes still watching his face. But you must eat. I'll fix it anyways, and you can have it or not, as you like. She stood up and placed her sewing on the table by the lamp. Sit down, he said. Just for a minute, please. Sit down. Wasn't until then she began to get frightened. Go on, he said. Sit down. She lowered herself back slowly into the chair, watching him all the time with those large, bewildered eyes. He had finished the second drink and was staring into the glass, frowning. Listen, he said. I've got something to tell you. What is it, darling? What's the matter? He had now become absolutely motionless, and he kept his head down so that the light from the lamp beside him fell across the upper part of his face, leaving the chin and the mouth in shadow. She noticed there was little eye muscle moving near the corner of his left eye. It's going to be a bit of a shock to you, I'm afraid, he said. But I've thought about it a good deal, and this is decided the only way to just tell you right away. Hope you won't blame me too much. And he told her. It didn't take long, 4 or 5 minutes at most. She sat very still through it all, watching with a kind of dazed horror as he went further and further away from her with each word. So there are days, he added, and I know it's kind of bad time for it to be telling you, but there's simply no other way. Of course I'll give you money and see you're looked after, but there needn't be really any fuss. I hope not anyways. It would wouldn't be very good for my job. Her first instinct was not to believe any of it, to reject it all. It occurred to her that perhaps he hadn't even spoken, that she herself had imagined the whole thing. Maybe if she went about her business and acted as she thought she had been listening, then later when she sort of woke up again, he might not find none of it ever happened. I'll get the supper, she managed to whisper. This time he didn't stop her. When she walked across the room, she couldn't feel her feet touching the floor. She couldn't feel anything at all, except a slight nausea and a desire to vomit. Everything was automatic now. Down steps to the cellar, the light switch, the deep freeze, the hand inside the cabinet taking hold of the first object it met. She lifted it out and looked at it. It was wrapped in paper, so she took off the paper and looked again. A leg of lamb. All right then. They would have lamb for supper. She carried it upstairs, holding the thin bone end of it with both her hands. And she went through the living room. She saw him standing over by the window with her back to her, and she stopped. For God's sake, he said, hearing her but not turning on. Don't make stuff for me. I'm going out. At that point, Mary Maloney simply walked up behind him, and without any pause, she swung the big leg with a frozen leg of lamb high in the air, and brought it down as hard as she could on the back of his head. She might have just hit him with a steel club. He stepped back a pace, waiting, and the funny thing is he remained there standing for at least 4 or 5 seconds, gently swaying. And then he crashed to the carpet. And that's where we'll end for today. We'll pick this up tomorrow, as well as looking at Chapter 10 in our course novel. Reminder, we have a 2-hour class tomorrow from 2 to 3 and from 3 to 4.